Hello. All right, so there, I'm going to reintroduce myself. I'm Adam Sessler. I had a marginal career once upon a time hosting television shows about video games for ZDTV, Tech TV, and at the very end, G4. I guess that's what makes me somewhat relevant to this subject here of the leisure economy, although I was stressed for most of the time. Anyhow, I've decided to move on to actually find new realms of anxiety as the co-founder of the company SpikeTrap. It's a machine learning-based data analytics company specifically designed to understand the language around video games. As some of the guests right here are getting mic'd up, I just wanted to start this when in 1998, when I first started out hosting GameSpot TV on ZDTV, I proudly called my parents that I was leaving my job in finance to host this show. And to say they were incredulous is an understatement. My father, it took him 2 years to understand that I was not hosting infomercials about video game platforms, and he suddenly realized that I might be generating some form of income, but there's probably no longevity. They finally booted me out in 2014, he had finally understood that no, this video game thing actually has some currency out there. But I think the discussion we're about to have with these four exceptional guests is really going to highlight the fact that that was really at the very beginning of something that's become far more robust, fascinating, and I think with a very exciting, although uncertain future. And with that in mind, I would like to bring out the first of our four guests. He is the CEO of Neverdie Studios and is also known for a famous quote where he believed that it was possible to earn a living in a virtual world. And this is John Neverdie Jacobs. When you see the green light, you're a winner. Our next guest, he is the EVP and EP of Platform Technology Experience at Blizzard Entertainment, Geo Hunt. It's kind of like the Tonight Show, but very, very, very different. Our next guest, he is the founder and CEO of High Fidelity, although you probably would best know him as the creator of Second Life, which, to make it relevant to this discussion, they were generating 700 million in annual transaction volumes at its height. This is Philip Rosedale. All right, and our final guest, if you have a young person, you're probably familiar with what he works with. This is Craig Donato, the CBO at Roblox. Thanks so much. So the leisure economy, as I kind of pointed out in the beginning, there was a way even for someone like me in the very beginning to kind of play video games to some extent during the day and make money off it. It's changed considerably with streamers, with what's happening in esports, with what's happening in user-generated content. Are we at the point of the leisure economy, or are there still stages before we start to see something that we really could believe is a self-sustaining, virtual, I guess, leisure economy? And John, I'm going to pose that to you first because you seem to be the firmest believer in the future of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now we're at this, with the advent of the blockchain, it's suddenly possible to have interoperable, decentralized, tokenized assets for everything that we utilize when we're playing games. And so this is the thing that the missing link from the past, where we were able to create economies within our world, but having an economy inside a single game, it's a very small market at the end of the day, and it doesn't support a lot of, it doesn't support a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But once you can trade assets between games, which you can on the blockchain, suddenly the market for the labor of a player grows exponentially. And so now you will have a lot more people that are able to make a living playing games.
Philip, I want to throw this to you, because obviously Second Life was, I think, the first time that we really saw the actualization of a virtual economy and a virtual existence and sort of trading happening in this virtual space. Obviously, there was no blockchain back in those days, but you are flirting with blockchain now. Do you consider that to kind of be that essential shift that's really going to sort of open up this notion of the leisure economy?
I think, like John said, the blockchain is definitely an amplifier, a network effects amplifier. Those things people build have got to be as convertible as possible to others. But that said, like even looking at the opportunity for virtual work as demonstrated by the numbers for somebody like Roblox, Second Life is still $700 million a year in transactions, which is like $5 billion so far over its lifetime. And Roblox at present, I suspect, is even more than that. And so there is every possibility here that people playing or building or both together in virtual worlds are going to be able to work there. I mean, it's underway.
And when it comes to Roblox, we were chatting a little bit earlier that it really was, its inception was 10 years ago, right. But it really hit its strong success only a few years ago. Was that something, the idea of it, creating its own economy, its own? I mean, I'm almost looking at some of this as like its own city-state. Is that something that you can make happen by design, or is it something that needed to happen organically on its own and suddenly you're the beneficiary of it?
It needed to take a long time to evolve, right? So in that kind of classic UGC network effect, where you had to have content to attract players, and the more players that made our development environment more attractive, and that had to feed back on itself for many years before it finally tipped. So now, for example, we have about 2 to 3 million active creators on our platform each month, and last year they produced about 11 million titles.
Was there almost a critical mass that you had to reach in terms of sort of content that was available on the platform, that was going to be the point at which you're going to be attractive enough to a diverse set of interests of a player base?
It was both the critical amount of content, and also it was enough where we started, the top developers started making enough money that they could actually start to build teams, right? So right now, a top creator on our platform can make around 250 to 300K a month. These are typically kids 16 to 20 years old. So now they're able to form teams of 5 to 10 people and actually make a good run at it.
And it's the best transition ever to go over to Geo. You're over at Blizzard. Obviously, very, very established, very, very well aware of what you can do and how money can be made sort of within this virtual space. Obviously, the initial success of StarCraft and its hyper popularity with teams and competitive play in Korea. But that was a while ago. We've now seen repeated success. Hearthstone, we see it with Overwatch in a gargantuan way. Is this, once again, something that can be done by design, or is there a need for some organic element? Obviously, the interest of the player base, but then do you have to let the audience almost help shape what's going to be this big success of, say, the Overwatch
Yeah, I would
League?
say definitely the audience plays a big role in that. I mean, a lot of what has transpired in esports and as it has evolved over the last 20 years has been very organic, and now you see companies starting to lean in and try to put a little bit more structure around that, and we're certainly doing that as well with the Overwatch League and with some of our other esports. But I think the interesting transition that you're making actually is when you talk about the leisure economy, is there's ways for players to make money, our developers to make money inside of these gaming experiences. And then there's a lot of opportunity also now outside of the games for players, streamers, broadcasters, and all of the folks around that, like all the folks involved around the periphery of those, whether you're a streamer or you're an esports athlete, there's a ton of people involved in esports who are making money, actually have a living. They all think of this as their job. And if there's any hallmark of an economy, it's folks who think about making money as a job who are doing it. And there's plenty of people inside of esports and, of course, inside, on Twitch and everything else who are approaching that as their job. I mean, that's an economy. I
think it's an important point. I think this is very much true for streamers, which I think are the most apparent element for, say, for the non-playing world, for my mom and dad, who's like, I hear people can make money playing the video games. But I think the way that popular narrative is out there is that, oh, look, I accidentally started to make money at this. Whereas, no, there is, I think leisure is a deceptive word. It's, there's a lot of hard work that's happening behind this, and it's not even just by the people who are the most prominent, be it the streamers or be it the athletes, that to put on an Overwatch League tournament, I mean, there's a small army that has to be mobilized that you will never see in front of the camera.
Right, there's a lot more people working behind the scenes than you ever see in front of the camera, right? So, yeah, that's a big part of the economy that's being created outside of the game, is real jobs for people, whether they be shoutcasters or coaches or, team managers or the people managing the whole production. Kent Wakeford was up here earlier in talking about all the different arenas that are sprouting up all around the world. Well, guess what? It's an arena. It's got concessions. It's got everybody that is involved in operating an arena now has a job in the game economy, right? Even though it may not seem exactly like they're playing
Paper
games.
goods industry is like, our margins have gone up. This must be connected to what's happening at the esports arenas. John, we're talking about esports. We're talking about user-generated content. We're talking about sort of blockchain and how that works in these virtual worlds. And I've become increasingly interested in this idea that, we have, a big game like Overwatch as part of esports. We have, a big virtual world like Second Life that's part of, say, virtual worlds. Are these all an interconnected economy, or these tend to be, once again, this idea of city-states, that there might be some interaction between them, but they tend to be fairly self-sustained and self-sustaining? You seem to be trying to sort of answer for that question, but how much linkage between them do you see as this overall leisure economy?
Well, the shift connects everything. And the shift, I think, is that we are moving towards this standard where we have to give value to the players. And that's where the leisure economy, that's where it fits. It's not that they don't work. A lot of the games that people play are job games, whether you're building skills as a basketball player or an esports athlete, or whether you're even crafting in a game. They are job-related games. So that ties everything together. And then there is this opportunity, and it's a tremendous opportunity to create interoperable assets across these worlds and games right now with the blockchain. And that's something that mustn't be missed, because if we do, then we're creating an infrastructure and we're creating that value that can be moved between all of these games, all of them. And that gives everybody greater longevity and greater value. So that's what I see, and that's definitely, it's something that you really have to force people to not focus on building fragmented worlds, but to try to keep the door open to interact with other worlds.
Philip, I'm just going to look to you just because of your sort of legacy in this space. Is this possible? I love the utopian nature of it.
Yeah, I mean,
but and not just from a player interest point of view. I think players would be very interested, but would the industry even sort of withstand or be willing to allow for that sort of almost cross-pollination or trade in between gaming entities?
I mean, first, these things are always a question of timing. The idea of the blockchain, or of generally of public databases as being a way for games, for example, to exchange information between themselves, I think that's kind of sure, absolutely. The tactical question is what's likely to drive massive, use and consumption across, say, games of assets. And it's obvious, of that $5 billion that's been traded in Second Life so far, probably about 2 of it is avatars, is identity, what you look like. And so aren't game companies going to be motivated if there's any kind of reasonable standard that lets you describe what you want to show up as in a game? Even if you're putting on a suit, from the game, you probably want to look like something. And I personally think, with Second Life as the example, there's little question but that in the coming few years, game companies are going to say, great, here's how you take your identity into our game, and that'll be probably most logically done on the blockchain, and it'll create a huge economy.
Do you think, I almost wonder if that would mitigate that desire to sort of take what you're earning, take what you're creating inside of the virtual space, and then kind of drag it back out into the real world, be it in terms of hard, actual currency or turning it into an object. I mean, if there's, I'm now starting to wonder, like, is this the way we get to that Ready Player One state because we create an economy that's existing among all these entities?
There's just one thing I'd say. The one big thought that's a big technology futures thought is, as the cost of all the stuff we're really wearing is driven closer and closer to zero by efficiencies in manufacturing, how much of our income, regardless of whether it's virtual or real, will we spend in the virtual world versus in the real world? That's a thing that I think about all the time. Like, at what point will it be better for me to spend money on clothes for my avatar than bother doing the same thing for myself in the real world?
I think that's already happened. I mean, somebody was talking about where is the future. That went on in Second Life. That's existed in many games where people are actually investing more heavily in their avatars than they are in the real world. And that's just, if that's where their social infrastructure, if that's where their friends are, that's where they invest.
And Craig, that kind of brings me to you. That with Roblox, it's serving maybe a more narrow age demographic.
That's right.
And its creator base is well. I get the sense that the creators might be a little bit older, but the consumers are a broader age range that goes from quite young.
Yeah, our player base is anywhere from 7 to 17. The creators are probably 16 to 20. They've graduated, kind of moved their way up. But the player base, you're right. I mean, I think 50% update their avatar every day, right? So they're dressing up their aspirational identity. So it's a huge part of the behavior. And it's been fascinating to kind of see how engaging that is for folks.
Now, do you foresee that kind of this economy that you've created within Roblox itself, and that people will move out of it? Do you see sort of graduation, or do you see sort of a maturity of Roblox itself as that older end of the player base becomes, well, they become 20, they become 21?
Well, let me kind of take a long-winded answer to your question. So we are seeing things pop out of our world through the IP that's created in the game. So for example, we took the top characters from all the top games and we turned them into toys. And those toys became the top-selling action figures at Toys R Us and Walmart. And now we're creating books and we're creating clothing apparel. And that creates revenue streams for all those creators. So they're actually making money in-game, but now they're actually getting real-world income streams from the IP that they created in these virtual worlds. But that IP is being manifested in the physical world. So it is starting to hop over.
And I think this touches on, and I'm not aware of any studies that have been done, but just kind of what the economic impact now is of what's happening within games. It's not just within that gaming space itself, as we were talking about earlier. It's flooding out into other far more sort of established industries and becoming a new source of revenue.
Right, and I think actually when it jumps outside of the game, you have greater opportunity for some of that cross-pollination. I think when you talk about sharing virtual items between different games or different virtual worlds, you are going to run into some IP issues, right? Because every publisher, certainly every AAA publisher, is going to feel precious about their IP, and the idea of like that free flow of items between virtual worlds. I mean, it's a wonderful idea. I just think it will run into some challenges just from every AAA publisher naturally wanting to protect their business a little bit. Where you do see it happening quite a lot is outside of game. I mean, look at Twitch and YouTube. You have the same streamers who are streaming multiple different games. They're building an audience, and then they're streaming multiple different games, and they're actually promoting multiple different games through their streams. Or through their videos, and I think that's a really good example of that. You see athletes who succeed in one esport and then trying to move over and succeed in another esport as well. So you see a lot of that, and you see the arenas hosting many different esports, not just from one game or one publisher. So I think you see a lot of that cross-fertilization and pollination happening more readily and easily outside of game than in game. Which doesn't mean it never happens within game. There's just some natural challenges.
No, it's a great point, and that's why actually there's this tendency for developers just to develop specifically for their world. So where we've identified the opportunity there is to focus on the non-IP related game assets that are ubiquitous, which are infrastructure related, so transport, travel, revival, attributes, skill, experience. Those attribute points, which have always been data points inside games, are universal in all games. So the blockchain, you can tokenize all of those things, a hit point, a skill point, a luck point, as well as, and these are much more, developers, it's much easier to embrace something like that, even if you only embrace a tiny little bit of it, to then support your economy and tie you to another world. And then some developers are just going to go, oh, great, I don't have to build any of that stuff. It's all there, and I'll just build a great game and go with the balancing. So I do think we have that opportunity now, actually.
I want to get to challenges, because there always has to be the downside to everything. But one of the things that has sort of struck me, be it esports, be it user-generated content, because so much of that content is sort of tied to its own discrete world or a platform that it exists within, and then just the proliferation of streamers. You go on Twitch and that's a lot. This kind of goes back to just the early days of the App Store, where it was almost like, I have no idea if this is good or not. How much consolidation do you think might be necessary to sustain this economy? I do start to worry sometimes that if there's so much fracturing of opportunities, be it games, be it esport leagues, be it various platforms, will that create a burden to be able to sort of make this economy self-sustained, because the consumer just won't know where to go? Okay, I'm just going to leave it at that. And Craig, you gave me the quizzical look, so I'm going to throw it to you there.
Oh boy. Well, I'm not sure exactly where you're going with it, but for us, I mean, we want to embrace scale. Like, for us, we want to make sure that there's tons, like every time a player comes to our platform, it should be different, right? There should be new games. The games that were there before should be different, right? So discovery is a huge challenge, right? A standard App Store metaphor doesn't really work well for us. So we need to think about, how do we do social discovery? How do we actually leverage influencers so that we can actually effectively distribute traffic on a long tail, right? So if we're building an economy, it's important to not just distribute all the focus and all the attention on 10 games, right? So that we spend a lot of time working and thinking about that.
And Gio, I mean, in North America, we have about 4, arguably 5 major professional regular sports. We have a lot more sort of esports, both by genre and by just the sheer number of titles that are considered to be competitive and out there. Is that something that you do think is sustainable, or do you have any idea sort of in your head? It's Overwatch and how many other games that can kind of be out there?
It is a question that gets asked a lot. And the honest answer is, I don't think anybody knows the answer yet, right? I think it's, we're still at a fairly early stage in the development of these industries, or particularly esports and streaming. And you're right when you mention that it is difficult to break through and become a celebrity online, whether it's on YouTube or Twitch, or to become a professional esports athlete. Look, it's a lot like Hollywood, a lot like other entertainment industries. For every Brad Pitt or superstar actor, there's hundreds and thousands who are struggling just to make ends meet, with day jobs while they go on auditions. And I think a lot of that is true also of folks in these industries. Every single one of them right now is basically a small business owner aspiring to become a celebrity and break through. So, how much of that is sustainable, and how does it, at what point does it all become much more mature, frankly, as an industry? I don't think we know yet. I don't think anybody knows yet. How many different esports can be supported? We don't know, right? Probably not 1,000. But
probably more than 5.
But probably more than 5, especially when you think about on a global basis, right? And maybe there are some that are ginormous and some that are a little bit more niche. We frankly just don't know yet.
I like the idea of sort of taking what's happening with said leisure economy and kind of looking at it in its adolescence. Not just because it's in that point of maturation, but that's also the point of maturation where one tends to act out, do things and not necessarily think about the consequences behind it. And this is my really tortured segue into matters of sort of player, streamer behavior, matters of toxicity. We've seen a lot of incidents happen in the past few weeks, in the past few months, that can start to give, it can cast a pallor over, I think, a lot of efforts of what all the 4 of you are behind. Is that something that sits in the back of your mind, that this could also be sort of an impediment to kind of strong, healthy growth, because suddenly there's scrutiny? Well, if it's deserved or otherwise, that's really going to kind of stigmatize this entire effort of a gaming economy. I'll go to you, Philip.
When I look back now all these years on Second Life at the beginning, one of the things about it that without question was one of its greatest appeals, and I think it speaks to this, was diversity. Second Life, because at the time especially it was just, all you had to have was a broadband connected PC, and at that time, 2005, everybody had those worldwide as their most common computing device. As a result, when you walked into a bar in Second Life, you walked into a bar that had half men and half women. It had people from all over the world. It had 3 different languages being spoken. It was incredibly diverse. I'm sure that the same has been true of things like World of Warcraft. That really means a lot. So what I would say is, yeah, absolutely, you better believe it. It's all about people. The interactions between people is, I think, what will drive VR as a hardware category forward right now. Not games as much, but just people's interactions within them or within anything. And you got to make those interactions a level playing field for a diverse set of participants. If you make it something that only young men enjoy doing, you are absolutely going to fail, because the world is not an interesting place if it's only a room full of young men.
But a social space, especially a social space in VR, I mean, the opportunities for poor behavior that might also translate in a way that could be so negative and so compelling for someone never to want to return. I mean, I have to imagine that's something that sits in the back of your head. And
I mean, VR body presence in VR creates the opportunity to upset people in a way that you can never possibly do in a video game. There's no question about that. There's lots of studies on it. But at the same time, though, I would say we live in the real world together. We can make this work. I mean, it's not really this isn't an unsolvable problem. VR actually has the advantage that I can't actually reach out and strangle you in the real world. So that's fantastic. As a starting point, we have a safe environment that is profoundly safe in a way that the real world, sadly, is not. So I think we just need to, but I'm not belittling the fact that there is an abundance of work that needs to be done amongst all of us to make sure, as I think is the best way to put it, that a diverse representative crowd of people can jump into these worlds and have a good time.
And Gio, obviously this is something that Blizzard has been very cognizant of and just recently spoke about in terms of Overwatch and really trying to deal with the toxicity.
Yeah, you raised the question is, do we think that toxicity has an impact on the leisure economy? Honestly, I think it's a much more serious and grave concern than that. I think it is a very serious issue for the gaming industry as a whole right now, we all have to band together and figure out the best solutions to address that. We're doing a lot at Blizzard, in terms of how we're approaching it technically. We are investing a lot in AI solutions, actually, to kind of monitor the interaction between players. But it represents itself in a lot of different ways. It's not necessarily just toxic chat or something. It's just griefing players in game and stuff. All of that stuff contributes to a really, bad player experience.
It's a very unwelcoming experience to grow that audience.
And at a time when you are particularly vulnerable, you're gaming. Like your defenses are down. We've all felt this at some point. Like I have. I know you guys have. Whenever you're gaming and something toxic happens, it hurts. It really hurts. And so we take that extremely seriously and are doing everything we can to combat that. And in part, part of our solution, at least, is enlisting the community that we hold so dear, to help us do that. Like the best way to address the toxicity in game is to have players flag when they're seeing it happening, and then for companies to take the appropriate action. So that's a lot of what our approach is, kind of a player-based with AI-based approach to tackling it. But like this is a very serious issue for our industry, and we all need to pitch in to fix it.
And Craig, obviously this is probably of even greater importance given the age range of the player base that you address inside of your economy.
Absolutely, it's a top concern for us. So we do very similar things where we have a lot of machine learning algorithms that are monitoring all the behavior. We're looking for, obviously, inappropriate behavior as well as bullying behavior. We also, we strongly encourage people to report inappropriate behavior, and we have a team of over 400 moderators that are available on the clock to jump into a game and to figure out what's going on. So it's a huge issue for us. Ultimately, I think, though, it's not just a safety concern, it's how do we actually create the incentives for appropriate civility, right? And especially if we can get kids very young, which we have them, if we can teach them appropriate ways to be civil, and as you mentioned, they can deal with a bully in a way that they don't have to worry about getting physical harm. It's a great way for them to learn how to collectively shut down the bully. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for good if we get our jobs right.
It is the real world. At the end of the day, the digital world, the digital experience is the real world, and you can't escape it. It's there, and you can certainly build tools in, because obviously as a developer you want to control your environment as much as possible, but it's a proving ground. And education is critical because you're training people to deal with people. And so I don't think there's any escaping it. I think I certainly haven't been able to escape it. There's always a shock, really the reality of people, you're right, and the nature of people, but it's the real world digital. That's what it is.
And I was planning on throwing you a softball question to get something profound out of you to close out this topic, and thank you, you did that all on your own. John, Gio, Philip, Craig, thank you so much. That was an absolutely fascinating talk. I wish we could go on more, but we are out of time. Thank you all. Another round of applause for them.